Hello, everyone. Happy Thursday. Thank you so much for joining us for our event today in collaboration with ACM. Before we get started, if you guys could all please sign in with that bit.ly or the URL on this side. And this way we can send you the recording of the event right after. So please make sure to sign in. While you're doing that, we just wanted to introduce the two clubs and tell you a little bit about what we do. So the UX Club has been around ever since 2014 with the mission of spreading user-centered design and information about that to students at UT Dallas. We hold speaker events, we have panels such as today's event, and a lot more fun events planned throughout the year. So please make sure to use the Linktree link on that slide to follow us on social media and see what we have planned for fall semester. And then I will pass it on to Rashmi to tell you guys about ACM.
Yep. Hello. So ACM Education is one of the divisions of ACM, which is a club to help promote a more collaborative engineering community at UTD. And ACM Education specifically helps students through programs and workshops such as this. And for our programs, we run the mentor program, which pairs underclassmen with upperclassmen to kind of gain valuable advice. And this semester, we actually started the technical interview prep program, which we help students prepare for interviews through weekly workshops and practice sessions. So that's ACM Education in a wrap.
Thank you, Rashmi.
All right, I want to introduce our panelists for tonight. They're all from projekt202, which is a local consulting firm which focuses on creating experience UX design. They also do experience design and do experience-driven transformation. So first, I want to start off by introducing the designers. Brian Barron is an experience director who has been with projekt202 for over 5 years. He works with stakeholders and users to take projects all the way from the idea phase to completion. Next, we have Nadia Knox, who is a senior user experience designer. And her experience includes working on projects within local government, finance industry, and computer software. Now, on the developer side, we have Patty McCletchy, who is currently a design technologist, and her experience ranges from marketing to user experience design to front-end development for enterprise software companies. And last but not least, we have Tanya Simpson. Tanya is a solutions architect at projekt202, working for the past 6 years as a full stack developer and as a team leader. So I'm going to pass it on to our panelists to get started with their presentation.
Perfect. Great. Let me just share my screen, y'all. All right. Can y'all see my screen okay? I can't see any of your faces. So. Okay, thank you. Yes. All right. So as Alina said, right, we're going to be talking about design and development tonight, the handshake between the two. That's what we like to call it at projekt202, because it's not a throw it over the fence and leave it with development. It's a partnership between UX and development. So Alina mentioned this a little bit. projekt202 is a consulting firm, right? We exist to deliver better experiences for people everywhere. And we focus on experiences that people have with all aspects of technology. So it's not just necessarily a software, it could be anything that you might interact with. And we believe that it's our responsibility to enlighten the world that there is a better way to do design and build software. So that's kind of us in a nutshell. And then I'm going to pass it off to Nadia to speak about UX.
Awesome, thank you, Patty. Hi, everyone. So I'm going to talk to you about UX and what it is and the design process that we follow. And there's a lot of information about UX that I'm going to share with you. But first, let's define UX. And some of you might be familiar with that acronym, but it means user experience, right? And it is about how a person feels when interfacing with a system. And when I say a system, it could be anything from like a website, an app, it could be desktop software. And nowadays, a lot of different things, as long as it involves some form of human-computer interaction. So next, I want to show you briefly this timeline for UX, because UX is not necessarily new. There's traces of it dating back to like the 4000 BC and 500 BC. This is not a history class, so I'm not going to go over everything. But as you can see here, we started thinking about ergonomics a long time ago. But it wasn't until the 1900s really that it took off. That's when you can see more like companies focusing on different aspects of UX, like Toyota in the 1940s, they focused on human, or they valued human input. There's the first book for UX, it was called The Art of Designing for People in 1955 by Henry Drew Fuss. And you see all of these other big names here. Walt Disney, they created their magical UX experience in 1966. So then there's the computer era, and finally we were able to coin a term for what this is. So Donald Norman in 1995, he came up with the name user experience. And that's when we finally had a name for it, because we knew it existed, but it didn't have a name. And he said, no product is an island. A product is more than the product. It is a cohesive, integrated set of experiences. And I think that this actually even applies to today in the way how we design products, because in a lot of many times we section products and attach teams to different sections of the product, and that's how we develop products even nowadays in an agile environment, especially. So I think this definitely applies to what we're doing even now. And these are some examples of what UX, or where you can see UX in the world, because it's really everywhere. So when you go shopping to the supermarket, like Target, you can see a lot of traces of UX there. You're exposed to UX when you're in your vehicle with ergonomics, also like dashboards, and now your devices integrate with dashboards. It's really cool. And also usability when of like mobile apps, like when you're in your phone, there's a lot of UX there in all of those programs. So we're definitely in touch with it every day. And I think most people, even children now, because their children are exposed to it, to technology very early in life nowadays. Even with the pandemic, right? Like a lot of kids that didn't even use technology before had to, just to be able to do virtual learning. So it's definitely part of our lives, and is something important. So as UX designers, we focus on what the user is feeling when they're using these systems and the impact that the systems have in their lives. If it's like helping them, or if it's making their lives harder or easier. And to give you an example, like if I was designing for like Siri or Alexa, I would be asking a lot of questions about like what are users going through when they're trying to use Alexa? Like, are they happy during that interaction, or are they annoyed? Because that's really what a UX designer does. Like, you start questioning things on behalf of the user. And there are actually quite a few disciplines within UX design. Most people are familiar with the terms design and research in general, because that's part of our titles. But there are specializations within UX, like interface design, information architecture, usability engineering, and content strategy. As you can see, these different disciplines have to do with different aspects of the design, like visual aspects, or how we organize and structure information, and like user testing or usability testing, like when we see if the user can actually perform tasks in the system successfully. And then with content, like we really like in UX, there's some content strategies like content writers that write the content from scratch, or they update it and they make sure the content is useful. And another important thing to say about disciplines is that usually designers specialize in one or two of these disciplines. With experience, like throughout the years, you're faced, or you're exposed to all of these different disciplines, but most designers specialize in a few. They're really good at a few. And there is a UX design process that I want to talk to you about, because as you can see here, there are quite a few steps before you even get to development. And I think it is important for everyone to know, especially developers, because in these other steps before you get a tangible design, there's opportunities for collaboration. So when we're designing, we usually start by empathizing with the user. Like, we really want to know who the user is and what they're going through. And then we go into defining the project, the different things like the scope, the users, the project, a lot of different things before we go into ideation. And in this ideation step, I feel like that's where you actually start interacting more with like members of your team, and you start coming up with ideas together. There's like working sessions, brainstorming sessions, to really think about like what the products should be before you move to the next step, which is the prototyping step. And that's really where you as a designer, you start creating the product like with design tools. Once you have a product, you move into testing that product or that design. And then once the design is close, is pretty good, it's a pretty good design, then you go and hand it off to development. And as you can see here, the process looks like a very linear process, but it's actually not like that all the time. Sometimes it is, but in most cases, like you sometimes go from like, there's slopes, like you can go through a few cycles of like ideation and prototyping until you get a good design. Same for like prototyping and testing. You can prototype it, test it, and then go back to prototyping again. So it really depends on the project and the timelines, right? Like how much time you have. And in other cases, the size of the project determines how many steps you're going to go through. So you don't always do all of these steps when you're doing UX. It really depends on a lot of different factors. And talking specifically about collaboration with UX and development, as I just went over the steps, like there are a lot of opportunities for collaboration, especially, for example, here on the left, I have information architecture. That's the step that happens early in the design process. And that has to do with like doing sitemaps or user flows and talking about navigation. That's a really good step in which developers and designers can collaborate. I found actually that these developers sometimes they have a pretty good idea of what the user flow should be. So those conversations tend to be very productive, and it's good to have them before we even put together a design. Another opportunity is all of these other working sessions that we're doing as part of the design process. They happen at any point of the process, and those are good opportunities in which you can contribute ideas and give recommendations. And I think developers should really try to be part of those as much as possible. And then last but not least, there is the prototyping step, but there's also wireframes. As you can see here, there's this wireframe that they're usually like not, they're like grayscale. They don't have a lot of detail, but they have layout and they have sometimes content. So this, even when you are either at the wireframe or prototype step, developers can still collaborate with designers because they can contribute ideas, they can identify potential problems, back-end related things. So this is a step in which, even though maybe you don't have as much time as you did prior to it, you can still iterate, and it's good to go to those design reviews if you can. So I would say, in general, like there's collaboration can happen at any point in the design process, and it's a good idea for developers to try and talk to designers like as early as possible, and see where they are in their process, because you might want to, like, offer help, or make sure that you are included in those design reviews, and you get to talk to the designer and see any materials that they can provide before you get the final design, because you don't want to be surprised. You want to know the design even before it's completed. And that's all I have regarding UX. Next, we're going to go and talk about Agile. So I'm going to pass it on to Brian.
Yeah, perfect timing. I've got a 5-year-old knocking at the door. I made sure to lock it before this meeting started, but hopefully you guys can't hear that too much. So I think good kind of anecdote to add on to what Nadia was talking about when you see user experience in the real world is both my girls, I've got a pre-K and a third grader, have been home for the last 13 months. And the older one has spent a lot of times playing Animal Crossing, Minecraft, Mario Kart, etc. with her friends. And any of those of you that own a Nintendo Switch, if you want to chat with your friends while doing all those things, it is not exactly easy to do with the Switch. So she spends probably a couple hours a day with an iPad propped up with Facebook Messenger, just with a group video chat while also playing together with those same friends on Switch. So I think that's a real, nice little practical reality of how sometimes if we don't consider all of the aspects of an experience, that a lot of times your users will solve problems in their own ways. Like people will find creative ways to get around things that you screwed up during your UX process, or that you didn't kind of build exactly the right way. So it's interesting to see some of that research stuff that Nadia talked about. We kind of get to see that firsthand. As for Agile, for the those of you from the UX side, from the computer science side, Agile is going to end up affecting both of you. I think Agile has been something that's been around a little bit longer when it talks about delivery of code, and it's a little bit fresher as in regards to design within Agile. But what we really want to focus on today is with y'all is kind of focusing on, okay, what does Agile mean when UX and Dev is talking to each other, and kind of the super high level of what is Agile, why does it matter? Is it simply a way to kind of get things done in smaller chunks, more quickly, more often, without as many like big, huge surprises, months and years into into a project. In the old days, there was waterfall, and the design team would work for 3 or 4 months on a design, and then we would finally bring on the devs, and they would like look at it and say, well, this isn't going to take me 2 months anymore. This is going to take me 9 months. And at that point, you can either lose all your money and go out of business, or you can beg your client for more money. So what Agile tries to do is deliver value to the customers, to the project teams, the product teams faster, so that each sprint is what it can be 1 week, 2 week, 3 weeks, but they're small incremental sprints. Each sprint, the UX team is working directly with the researchers, QA, and developers to kind of make sure that they're designing something, building something, testing something, and getting something that in a lot of environments can actually be ready to deploy to customers. And everything, one of the things we'll look at on the next slide is all of that requirements, the planning, everything is also working on an agile manner too. So like what is actually going to be a part of the product you release to customers can change from a sprint to sprint to sprint basis as well. So there's a couple different parts of Agile and Scrum, and Scrum is really just a kind of additional definition. One of the best, like most favorite parts of Agile is that everyone has their own version of Agile and everyone has their own acronym for it. And so Scrum is just one of those, and it's really kind of focused specifically on some of the ceremonies and the artifacts going back to Agile. So by ceremonies, it's the stuff that you do every 2 weeks. So that could be individually as a developer, it could be as a team, it could be the different pieces of that. So within a Scrum team, you might have a Scrum manager, you might have a project manager. It's those people's responsibility to kind of make sure that you're on time, you're moving fast enough that everybody knows what they're supposed to be working on. You've got designers and design leads. You've got tech people, so developers and developer leads. And then a properly staffed Scrum team will also have QA. A lot of times QA is the one that gets the short end of the stick there and it gets left out, but a properly staffed team will have QA as well. For artifacts, really there's a handful of things that kind of comes out of and goes into every sprint. One is the product backlog. So that's like a long list of everything we're going to do. The sprint backlog is like, okay, what do we think we're going to get done in the next 2 weeks? And then of course there's the actual work, right? The thing that we're trying to actually get done. And that could be sketch files for designers, or it's actually tested and ready for deployment code for developers. Looking real quick on what a sprint would look like, so you can kind of see these 2 weeks here in different colors. But the whole point of working in an agile manner with UX designers and developers together on a Scrum team is that you're meeting frequently. In the case of a stand-up, that gray one, that's on a daily basis. You're checking in. Everybody says, hey, here's what I did yesterday, here's what I'm doing tomorrow, and here's what I need if something's blocking me. So you're meeting super frequently. You're meeting as a team to make sure everybody's working on the right thing frequently. And then every sprint, so every 2 weeks, as a team, you're presenting completed code to the product owner or the project owner for it's ready for release. And same thing as a design team. It might not kind of slot at the very end of the sprint. A lot of times we'll put it someplace else rather than the final day of a sprint. But you're also at least at least once every 2 weeks, meeting as a team to make sure that design is ready, making sure that design is ready for the devs to pick up either next sprint or hopefully a few sprints later if you're working fast enough. A couple quick examples here, and I managed to make both of them animated simultaneously, which is sweet and not distracting at all. But on the left is kind of the more of the organizational stuff, the planning part. It's a list of the backlog, which is that list of things to do. And then each item within the backlog is called a user story. And a user story is exactly the requirements. Tanya will probably talk later about how there are never enough acceptance criteria, never enough details. But that's one of the things that you do as part of this process is making sure that you've got enough detail in here for a developer or a UX designer to pick up the story and actually kind of complete their work without having to need a lot of other people to help with the process. On the right-hand side, we've got a couple different things there. This is a tool called Abstract, and it's the one of many latest and greatest ways to kind of hand off completed design to a development team. So in the case of Abstract, you go in as a developer, as a designer, as a product owner, and you're able to kind of see all the design files without having to, this is a Mac app, but you can do it on the web too. Without having to have any special tools, you can go in and see exactly the details. Okay, what font is this supposed to be? What color, what size, how many pixels is it from one edge to another? And really and you can also kind of export. So if there's any imagery that you need or icons that you need, you can grab them out of that as well. So just a couple of kind of tools that are all part of that kind of Agile process and that handoff process. Excuse me, handshake. I still say handoff. Don't yell at me, Patty.
Oh, Patty, you're muted.
Still muted, Patty. I think it's because she was yelling at me and she didn't want everyone to hear her yelling at me, so she muted herself.
I'm sorry. I thought I was using the hotkey for Teams, and I apologize. Anyways, that's the end of our presentation. So let's get this panel started.
I'd like to kind of start us off. Brian, kind of going off of what you said, we were talking about the sprints, and I was wondering, it is pretty fast paced. You get like a lot of work done in that 2-week period. How often do you guys do sprints?
For the most part, we work within our client's structure because we're a consultancy. So this is going to vary a little bit dependent on, whether you work for a big financial company or you're a consultant kind of just temporarily working for a big financial company. But the most common cadence is 2 weeks. So you're going to have like nice, quick 2-week sprints where you try to get as much done. All the planning assumes that you only have a few days, to get everything done, and you'll kind of do that over and over and over again as long as it takes to get to a completed piece of software, or the other term MVP, of course, too. At projekt202 and at most places these days, most of your process will be agile. So most of your process will be in those sprint cadences. Some of the stuff that Nadia talked about, the research phase, sometimes we do that in a more like, okay, here's a big 6 or 8 week chunk at the beginning, at the very beginning of the project. But most of the time, it's in those 2 weeks cadences.
I guess kind of I was listening to that and I was thinking, you get so much done in those 2 weeks. Like, I wonder if there's like ever like burnout from like, you do one sprint and then you go, it's like start it like a week later. I was wondering if that was maybe something that happened.
Yeah, like everything, it's got its trade-offs, right? The old kind of way, you kind of get the opposite, where it's like you've been working on something for 3 months and you haven't seen it built at all, and you've got no confidence that it'll ever release. So yeah, I mean, sometimes you feel a little stressed because, especially as a designer, because the design team a lot of times will be working on both new designs and supporting the developers in the middle of the same sprint. So there's a lot of expectations on a designer during that sprint cadence. But I think it's something that you get relatively new stuff every 2 weeks, whether you like it or not. You're going to get something completely new to be done at the end of that 2 weeks. So.
It's really interesting. Thank you for sharing that. I believe we have someone raising their hand. If you want to unmute yourself, you can go ahead and ask your question.
Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay. So my question to you is like to the panelists. So like after the designers hand off the design to the developers, do they work on other projects or are they just like waiting for like the developers to give feedback or something?
I would say that we usually start working on something else, and then we wait to see. Eventually, we like review the work that the developers are putting together to make sure that it matches the prototype. But yeah, in most cases, we are doing other activities, and there's also sometimes at the end of the project, there's even items in the backlog that we could be focused on. So there's definitely some design work, or maybe even research. Maybe we're doing demos of the design. We're doing some research for the design.
Yeah, I think
okay.
We typically wouldn't roll, and again, that's a thing that's going to change a little bit from company to company, though. But like, you won't roll to a completely new project, so you'd be working on a different part of the same thing. So, as a designer, you kind of keep that context and stay in the loop. So
makes sense.
And then kind of going off of that, this whole panel is about, designers and developers working together. I'm sure there's a lot of ways it can maybe go off the rails. But I kind of wanted to ask you guys if you could share an example of like a project you guys did with like developers and designers that was successful, and kind of what you think made it that successful.
Tanya, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, mainly what Brian brought up a lot is really the first part of just getting together, meeting up, going over what the client kind of expects first off, and really starting that teamwork and collaboration early on. And I'm telling you, like, especially working with Brian personally on projects before, um, he can tell you how fun us developers can be on pushing back and wondering why things are designed the way they are. And but having that collaboration where we're both open with each other, it creates just a successful team. And they're open to telling us, hey, you know what, that doesn't work. They have eagle eyes. They'll tell you when something's a pixel off. And they need to be open for us as well. And that makes it really successful when we can come back to them and say, hey, guess what? We've been digging in all this data and all this code, and the client thought that this was going to work this way and this is how you designed it, but it's not going to quite work this way. And they have to go back and revisit, and they're able to really redesign something. And just that open relationship is just, it really works really well.
Thank
Yeah, I
you,
think
Tanya.
it's really key to kind of have that previous question we just had. Like if the designer disappears while the developers are trying to work, that's a sure sign of failure on a project. So it's just kind of working together is kind of the biggest thing. And that's part of the process is like just every dev story has to be approved by UX, and every UX story has to be approved by dev typically, to make either side successful.
Yeah, I see we have a question in the chat from Miriam, and she asks, how do you ensure that your website design or web application is accessible and user-friendly?
So this is something that I think is really important for when we're doing design reviews with developers. It's important for us as UX designers to be aware of all of the accessibility challenges that we need to meet. So on the UX side, right, the most apparent and obvious things are colors, text size, things like that. We always try to be AA compliant. And then on the technical side, we have to make sure that we're developing components so that all of the ARIA tags are there and you can do all of the keyboard navigation. And that's something that when we're in design reviews, if developers are seeing designs that they're like, all right, how are we going to code this so that we can make sure that a screen reader can read it? Are your header tags correct? Is it flowing in a manner to where if a screen reader was reading it, it would go in the correct order? Like those are things that together we call out and make sure are compliant. And then if we have, the dream team, a QA tester on staff, then our QA team is really helping us double check and make sure that all of our components are accessible and user friendly.
Yeah, and I would add for user friendly too, like usually we test designs, make sure that users can actually complete tasks, they can find everything easily. So we of course design things in a way that we know we go by like best practices, and also we follow trends. We make sure that designs are, contemporary, that they're appealing, that they're user friendly. But we always try to test because it's we do the best that we can, but we always have to see how the user is doing and how the product is performing.
Yeah, that's a really important thing about accessibility. I actually not think about that until Miriam brought that up. But thank you guys for sharing that. We have another question in the chat. This is from Jessica, and she asks, what resources do you use to learn about the latest in front-end development and design?
Yeah, so I can do that, and then Patty, I know Patty will probably have her own secrets as well. But before I know times are a little different right now, but conferences they're my jam. I loved being able to go to a conference and you have 10 speakers there and they are going to show you some, the cool stuff that they love, and you can just sit in the audience and wonder what were they thinking, or go, oh yes, this is going to be the next thing I'm going to use. And of course now things are a little different. It's definitely, but we have Twitter. You can follow the coolest person you love on Twitter and social media. And of course, with all our team channels, especially projekt202 or the places that you work, we have our own development channels, and we have really smart people that can snip those out even if the night before and you wake up and you realize there's something new. So there's definitely a lot of ways you can do with social media now as well, since we don't have the conferences. This is guys.
Yeah, and I would also say, before even coming to the development side of the world, CSS Tricks was it still is. I don't know why I'm saying was. It still is my go-to. I think I get a newsletter from them every single week, and I make sure I read that newsletter because before I even learned Flexbox and Grid, they had already done complete tutorials of that. And so as soon as I, got on the new Bootstrap library and all they're using is Flexbox, I was like, okay, where do I go learn that? And of course I had already received 10 emails from CSS Tricks about it. And, I'm sure the UXers on the call will tell you Medium. Medium is another great place for just online reading of design trends. And for dev, I definitely now use the dev resource. I think it's dev.io, maybe. It has replaced Medium for me.
Yeah, I was actually going to say Medium for reading. But I agree that a lot of the times I learn from conferences or webinars. So I try to look for those. InVision has webinars. A lot of companies do webinars to talk about different subjects like design systems and all the new techniques or the things that we all do as UX designers. And so those are nice. But a lot of the times I feel like I learn, it's also based on the project that I'm in. Once I get a project and I know what I'm going to be designing, I start doing a lot of research to learn more about those type of projects and see who the competitors are and things like that. So I see what the trends are for those specific products too. So you're always learning. You're definitely always learning. It never stops.
Yeah, those were some really great resources. Thank you for sharing those. This question is for Brian and Nadia. So we see that tools, environments, and methodologies are changing every day. So what does this future hold for the designer and developer relationship?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent question because as a person who doesn't actually design or code anymore and hasn't in a while, my skills are already atrophying around that, because I think it's probably been a couple years since I was in Sketch every day, and it's been close to 5 years since I was in Sublime every day. So it's been a while, but I think, especially as a person that's just learning, a person that's independent, I don't think you have to worry about that as much. And then a lot of it's going to be dictated by your overall organization. So just kind of paying attention to how that's going. Because right now, I mean, before Abstract, there was Zeppelin. Before Zeppelin, there was InVision. After Abstract, maybe after Abstract, if someone at our work named Lacan has his way, there'll be Figma. So it's changing on a regular basis, and I think the keys beyond the tooling is just making sure that you understand what are the goals. The goals are making sure that you as a designer or a developer are saying the same things that the person you're talking to is saying. So whether that's whatever that tool is, making sure that if I say this laser looks like this and works like this, that you understand that without having a bunch of trial and error and rework and back and forth.
Yeah, that like I really understand how like being on the same page is a really important thing, because I've been in situations where there have been lots of misunderstandings between designers and developers on like what was supposed to be done and what was done. Um, so this question is for everyone on the panel. As a designer, is it a good idea to know how to code as well?
I can take that. Well, if you guys can participate too, but I think it is a good idea to learn how to code, even just the basics of it. I do have that experience myself, and it has helped me a lot, because when I design things, sometimes I think about how they're going to be coded. Like I did front end development in the past, so knowing HTML, CSS, I think could help a lot, and also knowing frameworks like Bootstrap, but you don't have to like go in depth with your learning. It could just be basic learning, but I think it definitely helps you. And also it helps you for those conversations with developers, because a lot of the times, like, you kind of know like the level of effort for some things once you learn a little bit of coding. So it makes those conversations a lot easier.
Yeah. I can win more arguments with Tanya because I know a little bit. Because Tanya's always trying to say something's too hard, and I tell her no, we can do it.
Exactly.
I don't like. I see how knowing HTML and CSS is a good thing for designers, but sometimes I will say that it gets in the way of the communication between design and development, because sometimes you'll have a designer who was doing front-end development 15 years ago, and they're like, this needs to be a panel. And it's like, well, the panel means a lot of different things in dev now. Like, can you actually and that's why it comes down to terminology and a shared language of like, okay, these are the components we're talking about. So you actually can have a, intelligent conversation with each other and not be like, but I know, I don't know, sometimes it causes a little bit of conflict, but it is good to know. But I would say like right now in the front end development world, like you have to be such a strong JavaScript developer that like that is not something that I would tell a designer to look into. It's just not worth it. It just, knowing some CSS and some HTML is great, but I would say leave JavaScript.
We have another great question in the chat that Hafsa just asked. She said, when designers and developers are working together, what are some common frustrations or issues? How are you able to come to a resolution or even avoid them?
Tanya, do you have some frustrations you want to air here?
Since Brian, since you're no, so I really do think it comes to just that open communication. Brian did mention it before about acceptance criteria, and there are lots of times where a design is made and they just if they hand it off and run off, and then you just see this and you go, okay, cool, I see, click here, this is what it's supposed to look like, great, why? Like, why am I building it this way? This seems over complex. I don't get why this is blue. Why is it this blue? Like all these frustrations can happen. And it really all comes down to, you have to realize that being part of this sprint and this Scrum that we have with the Agile is that they are there with you the whole entire time. They've been during research, they know what the client wants, and now you're there with them. Y'all go over the requirements together, and that just, it clears up so much frustration when you know exactly why they have designed it the way that they have. Like, why is this flowing for the user the way it is? Why do they expect there to be buttons and tabs, and it goes here, it goes there? And that just really helps out with closing that gap of understanding why, as a developer, I am going to do it the way that I'm doing it. So really just the communication is just such a big deal.
Yeah, I think lack of clarity is probably the biggest point of frustration for both groups, right? And I think one of the ways to solve that is having those conversations frequently as a team, because there's been a lot of times where we design something a certain way and you talk to a developer at the beginning of a sprint and they're like, well, if I do it this slightly different way, that will save me literally 4 days. And you can say, well, yeah, I don't care. It was either that or that, and that's not going to make any difference to the user. Doesn't make any difference to the overall impact of the user experience. Go for it.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I think I muted you on mistake.
You didn't need to listen to him anyways. He was.
I apologize. I thought one of the participants had it unmuted. I sincerely apologize.
Can y'all hear me again? It's okay.
Yeah.
You can't, apparently.
We hear you.
I was done. I'm over. I'm done. I'm good.
So this next one is for Tanya and Patty. How do you decide when to write your components entirely from scratch and when to use styling libraries or other open source code?
Yeah. So it kind of depends on what the client is needing and how much time we have to get the component done. And also weighing the risk of using a library over the reward of writing it yourself, right? So for some things like input masking and date picker fields, why rebuild the wheel? When you can just extend a library, it would save us days to just pick up a date picker library or use something like Moment.js to do all of your time. And so I would say for me, that's been the biggest thing of like, how much time will this actually save me? And will this have any negative effect on my client or the project? Like, will it bloat the thing that I'm working on? Or is the amount of memory that this thing is taking when it's loading in the browser, is that worth it and worth my time to not have to write it?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think sometimes it's a huge time factor. And another thing to think of is, I guarantee you someone has already helped you with that solution, which is just like Patty said, with date pickers or anything cool, and icons and everything. There's so much out there, and it really helps you out. And going back with what Nadia said earlier with how they keep up with trends, I bet you anything a client has seen something and they brought it up to Brian and Nadia and said, I kind of want this. And then you realize, oh, this framework is actually this library. And then you get to realize that this trend has kind of allowed you to get to this library. And then, you can style it up, make it a little special, overwrite some stuff, make it, more specific to your client. But there's so many solutions out there. And yeah, you definitely figure out the time and what they're wanting.
I see in the chat we have a question from Harsha, who asks, what happens in situations where the developer may not be able to bring what a designer has in mind to real life? Some sites have incredible designs and animations that require very skilled developers to create them. How can UI UX designers work around skill limitations of the developers, or vice versa? It's a bit of a couple questions in there.
I would say that's where libraries come in, right? So like a lot of those really cool animations that a designer may be requesting. Like I have had a client tell me that I want their landing page to look like Apple and I want those animations. I need it to sizzle. And did I build those animations from scratch? No, I used GreenSock because that's what Apple uses. Like, I looked at what they did, and then I was like, all right, this is how I do it, and make changes enough to it so that it worked for the client. So that would be my 2 cents on like a more junior developer. Like, lean on those libraries when you have someone asking you to do something you don't necessarily know how to do.
Yeah, I would add that when you're in a situation like that, usually the developer brings those concerns directly to the designer, sometimes the product manager or the entire team. And then you have those conversations, and they usually are attached to timelines as well. So there's not a lot of time even to look for a library. Like, sometimes you have to make compromises, and you end up simplifying some areas of the design so that we can meet certain deadlines, and everyone is happy, and
And that's one of the things that you can do with Agile too, is that you break a bigger problem into smaller problems. So you can take something that maybe you don't know as a developer how to do, and you can say, well, can we split this up into these 5 different things, and I'll handle, A, B, and someone that maybe is a little bit more experienced can handle the other 3. So there's a lot of ways, especially when you're working within a team, that's going to work out. So it's not something where anybody's going to expect you to know, as a designer or a developer, know how to do everything on your first day or decade in the job.
Yeah, and to add on, because there have been several times where even as a developer, it's beginning of a sprint, and something's brought up, and I have to say, I've never done that before. I have no idea how to even start it. And sometimes along with the compromises, sometimes you can say, well, to start off, I know for sure I can get this blinking, different colors, and maybe next sprint it will do something different to be closer to what you're wanting. So, sometimes you can at least go with step 1 and keep on, moving forward and having this like progress and become more sophisticated as you move forward. So
step 1, Tanya, was just to wrap it with the marquee tag and the blink tag. Is that what you're implying there?
Yeah, the banner just comes across really slow and changes colors.
Yeah.
As it comes.
Yeah, and there's even things that we do within Agile called a research spike too. So like if nobody on the team knows how to do the thing that you're talking about, like let's spend 3 days, let's spend 5 days, whatever it takes to figure this out as a team, and then we'll kind of address at that point whether it should be something we take on or we solve it a different way.
Thank you for that really nice answer. Julia asked, how do you prepare for job interviews as a UX designer?
How you prepare for interviews. So I would say, well, make sure before you're going to have an interview, you go over your portfolio. You have what you're going to present. If you're not going to present everything, maybe choose a few different projects that make sense for the role that you're applying to, and also research the company, right, and what their offerings are, their products. Definitely put together some questions that you want to ask, because there will be time during the interview for you to ask questions. And sometimes it looks bad if you don't ask any questions too. So make sure that you learn about them and you put together some questions. But yeah, that's what I would advise.
Yeah, I think it's going to depend a lot on where you're going in the stage of your career. But I think, what we look at designers a lot is that we give them a design challenge, a coding challenge, depending on the job, right? And so it's not just coming in with a portfolio, it's being able to communicate, because especially in consulting, you need to talk to customers, you need to talk to designers, you need to talk to developers. So you need to communicate, explain how you solve problems, not just show these all this work from your portfolio. You need to be able to actually solve problems and communicate how you will do that in the future too.
Yeah, I would say it's very similar to like technical interviews where you go in and they want to ask you, questions about how you would architect something, in which can I attend the series on preparing for technical interviews, because I would like to attend that ACM if that's but yeah, I mean, like Brian was saying, I would say more times than not, the design challenge for UX interview is about how you think about the problem and less about how you're solving it. And like your portfolio gets you so far, but then actually how you're structuring your answer to a design challenge, I think probably gets you actually like through the door, right? That's the differentiator there.
Awesome. So I think that is all the questions that we're able to cover at our panel today, as we're nearing close to the 7 p.m. mark. Reshmi just dropped the check-in link for you guys in the chat, so if you haven't already done that, please go ahead and do that, and we'll send you the recording of today's event. And just before you go, real quick, if you could also fill out the feedback form on your screen and tell us how we did, so we can improve our events for you guys in the future. With that being said, I just wanted to thank all of our panelists today for joining us and sharing their amazing insights. I'm sure all of our attendees were able to learn a lot, and we really enjoyed the panel. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.
I'm getting the QR code so I can make sure we have at least one good review of our performance.
Thank you, guys.
Thank y'all. Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much. Have a good evening.
You too.